takes. First on 5.
From Studio 3B in Rockefeller Center, here is Jane Pauley.
Good evening. Kathy Lee Gifford said she was shocked to learn that a clothing line bearing her name was manufactured, at least in part, in sweatshops and by underage workers. Gifford said she thought sweatshops were a thing of the past. Maybe you thought so too. But experts agree that tens of thousands still exist. Tonight, we're going to take you inside some factories that labor watchdogs have called into question for an eye-opening look at where some of the clothes you wear may come from. It's an issue that affects not only those who work in these factories, but also those Americans who lost jobs when the work followed cheaper labor overseas. Here's Dennis Murphy.
You can say I'm ugly. You can say I'm not talented. But when you say I don't care about children, that I will exploit them for some sort of monetary gain, for once, mister, you better answer your phone because my attorney is calling you today. How dare you?
The celebrity was distraught.
And we can't do anything about it in New York City, it seems like. But I'm supposed to be personally responsible for everything that happens around the world, in Honduras.
She said she had no idea that young teenagers in Latin American sweatshops were turning out part of the line of clothing that carries her name. And then, a fresh embarrassment. Workers in a New York sweatshop charged that they'd been shortchanged making the very same line of Kathy Lee clothing.
They will be paid.
They will be paid.
Her husband tried to make amends, passing out envelopes of cash to seamstresses. Welcome Frank and Kathy Lee to the cutthroat world of the international garment game. A surprise not only to them, but to a lot of us unaware of a huge garment district just off our coastline.
Most people in the United States don't realize that there are 500,000 young women in Central America and the Caribbean who are producing apparel exclusively for the U.S. market.
Charles Kernigan is the American labor activist who made Kathy Lee's life miserable by linking her name to a Honduran sweatshop. He told us we should check out any label on all those piles of T-shirts for sale at the mall and see who makes them in countries like El Salvador.
The Salvadoran women, the young women who produce those shirts, get paid approximately 13 cents for every $12 shirt they produce.
So we went to El Salvador to take a look. We started at dawn in a mountain village, watching the school buses make their morning pickups. But the teenagers getting on board aren't going to high school. They're being delivered to another day at the sewing machines in the guarded, sprawling garment factories. Most of the workers here are women and girls. They can work legally at the age of 14. They make 78 cents an hour, cutting and sewing the brand name casual shirts and pants for sale at your local mall.
This particular run is Eddie Bauer's.
U.S. clothing retailers typically contract their work to factories like this one. Salvadoran women working for Korean managers in a Taiwanese factory, turning out shirts made of Hong Kong cotton for American labels.
So you'll be making orders of T-shirts, whatever, and shipping them to the United States?
The factory looked clean enough on our brief visit, and workers told their guests with cameras they were happy to have jobs in a poor country. But when we met later with some workers who got fired from that same factory, we got another picture altogether.
Do you recognize this, Mandarin?
The former garment workers said tyrannical bosses virtually locked the factory doors until shipping containers were filled with orders.
When the quality wasn't what they wanted, they sometimes hit us. 2 or 3 times a week, we'd work all night.
The workers, who say they were fired for trying to start a union, gave us a long list of grievances, from locked bathrooms to being cheated on overtime. We asked the factory lawyer if the workers' complaints were valid.
Is Mandarin working teenagers illegal numbers of hours?
As you can see for yourself, there are no teenagers working here.
What's more, the U.S. apparel manufacturers who contract work out to that factory told Dateline they all follow local labor laws and prohibit child or forced labor. But after our cameras left the factory, so did the Eddie Bauer Company. We were told it no longer contracts at the plant. Kernigan, the labor activist, says the policy manuals of American retailers are often ignored on the factory floor.
The companies come down, they play with the high unemployment, they play with the starvation, they play with the stomachs of the women, they play with their ignorance, and they play with their fear.
In building after building here, you'll find young women behind sewing machines. And almost all of this was built by the American taxpayer. The U.S. apparel industry needed cheap labor, and the Salvadorans were hungry for the work. So the San Marcos Free Trade Zone, and others like it throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, sprang to life. Even as the U.S. apparel industry was dying, American aid programs here provided low-cost loans to train workers, build the factories, even to advertise for American companies looking for cheaper labor offshore. You read it right, 57 cents an hour. The intent in El Salvador was to rebuild the country after a savage civil war and provide a trading partner for the U.S. Two people who fled the countryside where that civil war was raging now live in a shanty in the hills above El Salvador. Marta and Claudia Carcamo, mother and daughter. They worked together in the shirt factory you just saw. They hoped it would be their ticket out of poverty, but it broke them. Claudia had left school in the 5th grade and needed the factory money to resume her education.
Claudia, how old were you when you began working at the factory?
He was 15.
15 years old. And what was your job at the factory?
I cut thread on the shirts.
Claudia, you were 15 years old. Did they ever make you work at night?
Sí.
I was working day and night without any rest. That's why I quit.
Her mother, Marta, said she was fired for just talking with a pro-union worker. And she told us how other workers were treated.
Dummy, they called us, and used to hit people. And then would send workers out to sweep in the hot sun.
If the new apparel jobs for the Salvadorans haven't been all great, the loss of those jobs in America has been an absolute disaster in places like Hamilton, Alabama.
Oh, Lord. It is really hurting.
3 generations of Eva Lee Duke's family have been making shirts at the toll gate factory, selling them to customers like Macy's and Dayton Hudson for more than 40 years. But the average wage of $6.50 an hour just couldn't compete with the wages in Latin America. When we visited last November, pink slips were in the pay packets at toll gate. And this is what the toll gate shirt factory looks like today. It closed for good last Christmas weekend. The auctioneers arrived, gavelled off all of the sewing machines, and that was it. 4 decades of shirt making in Hamilton, Alabama came to an end. And it's not just here. The padlocks are going up at apparel manufacturing plants all across the United States. Last year, 90,000 apparel jobs just disappeared. We watched Lex Moore dump a sophisticated button sewing machine right off the loading dock of the factory his father started.
When it's over, it's over.
Out the back door.
Out the back door.
Junk pile.
That's right.
What do you think killed the apparel business in America?
Well, I think some of it is south of the border, and that's the countries Mexico, Honduras, Costa Rica.
We can't compete on some jobs at very low wages.
Carla Hills, the Bush administration's chief trade negotiator, told us to look at the big picture. The apparel jobs we lose, she says, are more than offset by jobs created by international trade.
My life has been a public record for the last 28 years that I've been in this business.
But Kathy Lee, for one, says she's jumping ship as an endorser if retailers don't start policing the sweatshops.
If you can't make it better, then I'll get out, absolutely. And I think
an honorable sentiment maybe, but reforming the apparel industry could cause you to snap your thread. It's a business always country hopping for cheaper labor, and El Salvador is finding out how fickle it can be. Like those workers in Alabama at the old toll gate factory, Salvadorans are being priced out of the market. Even at 78 cents an hour, they're no longer competitive. Apparel manufacturers are quietly moving next door to Honduras, where some of Kathy Lee's line of clothing was made, and where an acquiescent workforce of teenagers and young women will sew for just 38 cents an hour. Hard to beat that wage, right? Nope. You can take your work to Haiti, where they pay 30 cents an hour. So it's very tempting to take your business to the lowest bidder, no matter whose name is on the label.
And I think every celebrity that you would talk to would say the same thing. Nobody wants to be involved in something like this.
Of course, not all sweatshops are overseas. Many still flourish in America. And We'll have more on those in a future Dateline investigation.